Welcome to this quite magnificent surroundings of True House. We've titled this event, by the way, for those who haven't met me, I'm Jamie, one of the co-founders at Altogether. We titled this event How to Survive and Thrive the Coming Storm, or the Perfect Storm of 2023. Basically used quite dramatic language to say a lot of us are really in the shit and we're a bit worried. What should we be doing about it? That's the purpose of today. Learn from people who've faced down challenges, not just our panelists and our workshops, but from peers in the room, to help us make some decisions about what it is we might want to do to have the most successful 2023 and avoid any kind of disasters. Before we kick off and I introduce our panelists, I do want to say a few thank yous first. Because last time we had this event, I completely forgot to thank everybody and I felt shit about it. I didn't say the words SHIT because we're being broadcast live. I don't know why I think that's a reason not to swear, but anyway. So first of all, I want to thank the team at Drayton, who are one of Altogether's partners and who frankly prove every month what being a partner of Altogether is about. They wrote us a check, okay? No, let's not forget that. It's really important because it's the way that we do this and how we support all of our members. But they do so much more for us, and we've grown to really admire them as an executive search firm. And I did want to just make sure that, because I think Rod, Ian, Josh, who are our main contacts day to day, are here. Wave your hands, guys. Yeah, but then there's a few more Draytons, and Laura, by the way, who really helps day in, day out, is around somewhere. But could all the Drayton people just wave their hands? Because I do want to make sure that those of you who've got particular issues that search could help with, use their time today, grab them, extract all the knowledge you need out of them. They're more than happy to help, and we recommend you do. Secondly, not a partner of Altogether yet, maybe we can persuade them, are our hosts in this fantastic building, True. Now, I've known Matt, one of the founders at True, for some time, and when this building was constructed, I thought, wow, what's a private equity venture capitalist, because they do both, 600 million or so assets under management, early stage investing and mid-market private equity. What are they doing with this extraordinary Soho House-esque building? And then I find myself using it all the time, and that's what they're doing. They are being part of our community and building their own community through their portfolio and their networks, but also just helping others like us out, and I'm so appreciative of it. And it's an extraordinary place. So Matt isn't here today, but we have several True people here, but the big thank you has to go to Danny, wherever you are. Thank you, Danny, over there in the blue dress, who has been the most organized of any of us, frankly, and we really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll come to our panelists in a second. There's one other set of thank yous I want to make, because you're going to drink their drinks later, and I forgot to thank them last time. So first of all, Julia from Nixon Kicks, are you here? Not here. Luke, lucky say, Luke, are you in the room? But thank you to both of you. No, he didn't have to be here. He's provided us with his beer, which is the beer I drink these days. Ben from Karma Cola, if you're here, thank you. We've got wines from Accolade Wines. Thank you, Gemma. We've got more beer from Freedom. Thank you, Matt. And from Days Beers. Thank you, Mike. I just want to say a big thank you to all of those guys who have provided you with your refreshments after all the hard work we go through. Okay, let's get our panelists up. I'm going to just indicate their seats again so they can come and take their seats while I introduce them. So Ella, I think you're over here next to me. Jules, Vanessa, Mandeep. Sorry, if you guys want to come up. So Ella is hi, managing director here at True, and has this really brilliant role, I think, for Ella, because she plays on both the venture capital side of the business and the private equity side of the business, which is a bit what I do in my portfolio, and I really like doing a bit of both. It's a really great privilege to be able to do that. So and sits on several boards as part of the True portfolio. And before here was the Chief Marketing Officer and Chief Commercial Officer, not on the High Street, and actually interim CEO during a pivot. So we'll be able to pick on a lot of that experience, and we thank you for your time today. Jules Heidelman, I mean, your CV's too long, so I didn't, because you're odd, thank you. Saved me saying it. But Jules has been, by the way, Altogether's biggest supporter from day one. He also is the reason I met my co-founder Gussie, and he is our non-executive director. And I don't think actually Altogether would exist without you, fair to say. So I really do appreciate that, Jules. But this is the first time we've heard you at an event, so it could all change. As a portfolio of roles at the moment, including chair at Moju, D30 and Equip, which is the RAB brand. Several NED roles, too many to list. Previous chair role was at Innocent Drinks, my old place, which he did for 10 years, I think. There you go, hard 10 years. And his last proper job was as CEO, a long time ago, as CEO of Christie's London, not the auction house, but UK's leading designer and distributor of costumes and party wear. Well, I hope that means Halloween is always entertaining at your house. Then Vanessa. Vanessa is a colleague of mine from one of my board seats. So we both sit on the board at Rare Restaurants. Brilliant career in hospitality. Former CEO at Yo Sushi. Almost 20 years at Mitchell & Butlers in various operating roles with their premium brands. Former NED chair and then CEO, as we'll hear today, as one of our case studies of Vapiano. And we're really grateful to have you. Thank you. And then last but not least, Mandeep, who founder and CEO of Truva. We've known each other a few years since I was a client, or you were trying to make me a better client. I wasn't a very good one when I was CEO at Tom Dixon. And it's been a joy watching Truva's growth and development under you. I always enjoyed our conversations. Of course, Truva got sold to a company called Made.com this year, and I believe is back on the market. So if anyone is interested, there's a potential acquisition to be done there. You were private equity before, so you've got a private equity hat as well as a VC hat. So we've got quite a varied set of experiences. You are also giving us a little case study, a snapshot of one of Truva's. I think you tongue-in-cheek said many times that you've almost run out of money, but anyway. So this is the structure of it. We're going to have a little case study from Mandeep. We're going to talk about the issues. We're going to have a little case study from Vanessa. We're going to talk about the issues. Then we're going to turn it over to you guys to ask questions before we go into our breakout groups. Simple as that. And with that, I suggest I hand over and ask Mandeep to tell us one of his many stories of Truva. And perhaps, I know you're not in, believe it or not, he doesn't like giving advice. Altogether, it's all about advice. But anyway, maybe you've got some learnings that you would like to share from that experience. But if not, I'll prize it out of you. By the way, to use your mic, do switch it up, please.
There we go. Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, so I'm not a big fan of advice. I'm a big fan of stories, so you'll have to shut me up at some point, I'm sure. So as Jamie said, I was one of the founders and the original founding CEO at Truva. I've not been involved in the business for a few years, but the story that Jamie mentioned was that Truva, if you don't know Truva, we launched in 2015. We're a consumer marketplace that connects customers looking for beautiful homewares that have been curated by the best independent boutiques in Europe. We had a software platform for our retailers and these bricks and mortar retailers and a consumer marketplace on Truva.com. What is less publicly known is that we actually started working on Truva in 2013. A slightly different idea. We were called Street Hub, And the original idea was we were working with very similar independent boutiques, but at that time just in London. And we had a consumer mobile app called Street Hub, which allowed you to click and collect at these beautiful independent boutiques and pick up your order within 10 minutes or get it delivered within 20 minutes. So we did a delivery in 15 minutes or something in 2014. So far too ahead of our time, probably. And we raised a lot of venture capital money, or relatively large amount of venture capital money to do that from Index Ventures and Octopus Investments. And the best way to talk about a story is probably we spent far too long. I think one of the issues of being a founder, and it's true for CEOs as well, is that you have to be really, really determined about your vision, right? And really hold on to your vision and believe in what you're doing, even when, you know, you have all the naysayers, whether that's, you know, investors, whether that's, you know, your family, whether that's your other half telling you it's a stupid idea and you stay in your job. You're wedded to that, but at the same time, you also need the flexibility to figure out when things aren't going right. And I think one of the many mistakes I made was getting that balance wrong. So we'd launched Street Hub. We had raised a bunch of money. We you know, all the important things were working. Like Stephen Fry had tweeted about the app, so we had loads of downloads. You know, I was on BBC TV talking about the future of the high street. You know, and in hindsight, all the bullshit metrics were doing really well, but it just wasn't working out. We were getting lots of users, but we just didn't quite realize that it was a leaky bucket. We were acquiring a bunch of users, and the economics weren't working out. We weren't converting them to orders and actual recurring users. But we'd also made the mistake of spending all our VC money. So classic, right? So running out of money, slowly figuring out, realizing far too late that actually we needed to take a step back and do a strategic review. Now we did end up rustling out money from existing investors, which maybe I could talk about later if it's of interest, Jamie. But I think when we belatedly realized that actually we weren't spending enough time just listening to our customers, right? Only people who really mattered are consumers. And realizing that actually what was going on was that they were really frustrated that we didn't do traditional delivery. We had customers in Manchester or Berlin trying to buy through the app, and they couldn't, because we were only doing click and collect and 1 hour delivery. So it sounds obvious in hindsight, but it was partly because I was just so determined about our big vision of acquiring all these amazing, about mobile commerce, which was big at the time, that they realized that late. What we did then do, though, I think what we did well was like make those decisions really quickly. So we had to, you know, at this point, we obviously clearly had to extend runway. So we had a really brutal conversation with the team. We had to let go of probably about half the team. Just weren't relevant to the new approach. But also we took a step back. We went and spoke to all our customers. We ran, it's quite common in tech businesses, we ran a product market fit survey by a chap called Sean Ellis to figure out which customers loved it and which customers didn't, and essentially made brutal decisions that meant that actually our original vision wasn't going to hold. And for the first time, having, you know, I'll talk about fundraising separately. I think for the first time I went back to our investors and actually said, listen, I know you've said to carry on this path, but it's just not working. And probably one of the first times I realized that it was my job as a CEO to kind of let the board know what I think the right thing to do is, rather than let the tail wag the dog. I think I spent far too long listening to my investors and saying, oh, like, just carry on as is. And they'd push me to go raise external money, which was just clearly a waste of time, essentially. So turned around and said, actually, we're going to completely change direction. Everything I've been saying for the last 6 to 12 months, we're going to, not everything, but most of it, we're going to scrap. You know, we're still going to keep these retailers. We're going to take a step back. We're going to cut costs and figure out what the right strategic direction is. We've got a plan to do it for the next 3 months. And to my real shock, and notwithstanding one of my board members, I think, is in the room, they all said, yeah, what a great idea. And that really shocked me, actually, because I think we had laying out what we were going to do, why we were going to do it, explaining it, got a lot more support than I probably would have anticipated. And I was really scared to have that conversation, actually.
Is Tobin in the room?
Oh, he's not yet.
Not yet. You see, you can say whatever you like. It's not being recorded. I'm fascinated because you didn't mention this bit before. I'm fascinated by that that dynamic. Often you get boards where there are, I guess, the people who are driving the questions and the is this really working, and are you actually doing it? But this sounds like a board that who bought into your original vision and was so convinced by it they were sort of cheering you on from the sides. It does take a lot to turn up to the board meeting with the big names that they are of venture capital and tell them, I think I got it wrong.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I realized in hindsight was that we have these big names of venture capital, but it depends on your investor set, on your board dynamic and your shareholder base. But VCs take a very small stake, particularly in the early days, right? And they're on. We had an amazing board member, but he was on the board of a bunch of billion-dollar businesses. So frankly, the amount of time he was spending thinking about us and our strategy was negligible compared to me. And so I was mistaking their opinion as being far more considered than it was, and frankly, I'm the only one we were the only ones full time in the business, so we knew about the business than they did. So I think that was the dynamic I got wrong, and maybe even having been in private equity where we were majority owners and not as involved but more involved, probably gave me the wrong sense of that dynamic.
I mean, it is your responsibility as CEO, no doubt, Ella. In your experience, obviously we want our CEOs to be the ones coming forward with that. In your experience, are they always, or are boards needed to investors need to kick them into action?
It's a good question. I think the ideal setup is that they have the plan, the team have the plan, they own it, and we are there to support them and add the value where we can, whether that be through the network or someone we know or a relationship. My experience is every board is different. We've got some first-time CEOs across our portfolio. They've needed different support. They've needed different chairs. When I was not on the high street, that was very different as well, because it was a combination of VC. And we had Berda as well, who were kind of a hybrid PE VC shareholder. And they had zero operating experience. So there, it was very much the management team, but almost I would call it slightly dangerous, because they would make sweeping statements without having the operating experience. So that was quite challenging when I was on the other side, the more management side.
I mean, if I remember right, though, it was a board-led decision to pivot, not on the high street. And I may be completely misremembering it, giving you the interim CEO role and saying, get on and do it.
Oh no, that was completely
there wasn't a CEO.
Decision.
There wasn't a CEO.
Yeah, so it's a long story, so I'll keep it short. But when I was there, I'd only been there a month when the business went through significant economic challenges. So it had been a very high growth business on a path to IPO, and I'm talking 6 years ago, so quite a long time ago. And Christmas was huge for the business, as you can imagine. I joined November the 1st. Never do that, ever. Don't join a Christmas business on November the 1st. And the numbers just didn't come through. And it was very scary for all the team. And they were looking at it, and they'd just completed their Series E in that summer. So a new big investor was around the table and was very cross that those numbers weren't coming in. So it literally went overnight from you need to change the economic model into an EBITDA business. It had burnt 8 million that year, and it was having a tough Christmas. So it was, you need to work really fast, and by January 17th, we want a plan that moves you to turning a profit or the path to profit rather than high growth. So it was a baptism of fire, I would say, for me, because I had been running agencies prior to doing that. And then the team just went through a lot of change. So we went through a CEO change, a CTO change, a CMO change, all within 6 months. And so by default, I was handed the interim role, I would say,
person standard,
rather than because I was particularly brilliant at turning around an e-commerce business at the time. But that for me was the biggest lesson ever in how to pull together a team, how to show them that was going to be a positive thing. And I think for us, and it's probably very relevant for lots of people in the room, that mindset shift that needed to happen from working with a team that were KPI'd or OKR'd on growth, high growth, and not having to count the pennies like they were their own was huge. That was massive.
Okay, so I'm collecting a list of really important topics to dive into here. Fundraising we're going to talk about, and also there's a workshop on it. Pivoting and the rules of the game we're going to talk about. But just before we leave it, where we were, I want to ask Jules, who more than any of us, you've countless chair roles that you've had. The chair role is really important in these situations, regardless of whether you've got the CEO who can get to that answer. But from your experience, how can the chair and the CEO best collaborate to figure out when something's not working and move things along? What's the role of the chair there? What's the role of the CEO? And you might have to hold the mic up and
depends on the CEO. If you've got a CEO that doesn't know he's in trouble, find a new one, because it's usually pretty obvious. I think we could all agree on that. If he comes to you, they come to you and they say, it's not going very well, but this is what I'm doing, that's okay. But what is absolutely awful is the CEO that just thinks it'll be better tomorrow and we're going to have sunnier bank holidays. And yeah, don't worry about it, it's just a board meeting. No, not for me. So if you have a position of responsibility in a business, whether you're a NED or an investor or a chair, you need to get some pace into this. And something that focuses the mind, I'm not saying everybody would say it, is look, if we get any further in the shit, there's going to be a restructuring person from somewhere in here, and they're going to do all the things you know you should do, but you aren't actually doing. So get on with it. And then we have coffee. It's fine. I don't mind.
I think we just got an insight into Jules the chair, but it's absolutely understandable that a lot of the time a CEO might just not see the wood for the trees. When there is a storm, and indeed we called it a perfect storm for a reason, because of the number of different headwinds. Remember, this path to pivoting to profit line, those of you in the tech industry have been thinking about and worrying about this most of this year. And we're talking about it for everybody else as well, with regards to now the recession and the ongoing problems with input prices and wages, inflation, and so on and so forth. It's hard to see clearly in a storm, and the chair can help, I guess.
Hopefully, and yes, of course, everybody wants to move from not making money to making money, i.e. profit, but sometimes that's not realistic. So you need a more achievable goal, because if you achieve some goals, then confidence comes back into the organization.
I'm going to dive into pivot now, because for when we come to Vanessa's story, which is turnaround, although a turnaround and a pivot share many of the same stories. I think we're going to talk. I'm going to talk about it now. Let's go into this. A pivot. Rules of pivoting. So let's start back with Mandy. In looking back at that pivot and what you did do and what you didn't do, what's the key play here? What's the most important aspect of getting a pivot right?
Yeah, good question. I think it's more a principle, but no sacred cows. Essentially, there was when it came to revisiting what we were doing, we went back to square one, and we went and spoke to all our users, but also we didn't even say that we would necessarily be a consumer proposition, for example. Right? We explored whether we should be a B2B proposition, whether we should selling software to the white label to pharmacies, like any types of retailer. But I guess that was really crucial, right? It's just not artificially boxing in with barriers that you've put there, right, that are artificial. But also we had a defined timeline when we were going to explore things as well, because the problem is it could take forever, right? And cash is always a good determiner of that timeline, but you've got to put your own thresholds, barriers you're going to hit.
No sacred cows. Ella, what would you add to that?
So for me, it was just about the team. So the same people that got you to where you were and were really, really good at growth, and that, you know, didn't really count the pennies, might not be the same people that you need to get to with the pivot. And so for me, the more you know your team, the more you know the skills, like which bit, who are the big visions, who are the thinkers, who's going to help you with that next step, and who are more the people that are waiting to be delivered. So for me, it was about hugely, in any business now across the line, the pivot of thinking about communication. So I was talking with Danny earlier, actually. I think we're almost, I hope not, but forgetting it was only 2 years ago we all had to pivot like super, super fast. One day we woke up and we were all like, crap, we're going to have a business in next month, and what we're going to do. And we were all suddenly dealing with our teams remotely for those that hadn't done it. And I remember I was at Not on the High Street at the time thinking, if we don't get our small businesses to be able to work, we won't have a business. And so the pivot wasn't just about thinking about the immediate team and where we go, it was about the suppliers as well, and the partners, and what pivot they needed to do, and how can we work collaboratively on that pivot, so that we're all on the same journey. And I think sometimes you can be so focused in on your own business and what you want to achieve, recognizing that everybody's in this storm. So is there an opportunity to work more collaboratively with the people that impact your business in a pivot? I think that was a big thing we did at NOS, and we did it again in COVID, and it really proved to be fruitful for us.
And particularly about this pivot to profit, because I think we've heard it a lot. I mean, I podcasted it over the summer in that little podcast I did with Steve Schlenker. It's been the VC playbook for those who are venture capital back to sort of get on the path to profit. Mandy, the other day you sort of said to me, sometimes it may not be the right thing to do. You might just want to run straight at that oncoming storm. Tell us why that's sometimes the right thing to do.
Hopefully this works. I think that's a bit paraphrasing, but I think so I also do a lot of angel investing in tech. So one of my experiences from not just Truva, but in angel investing is that if you can get to profitability, fantastic, right? And in some business models, because of stage or sector, maybe you're doing deep tech or B2B SaaS or something. I know it's less relevant to you guys, but there's no point kind of halfway getting there sometimes if you just like slash everything. So in my view, so you kind of destroy the value of the business in order to get to break even, but you don't actually even get to break even, you get quite close. Then actually it's a no man's land, because no one wants to fund that business because you're not profitable, so you're not going to get any PE money. Whereas the VCs won't back you because you're not a high growth, interesting business anymore. So I think it's, and so one of my angels said once, sometimes if you're unprofitable, and this particularly applies VC backed when you're going between funding rounds, running towards a brick wall because you're running out of cash. So sometimes you've got to run towards quick because you've got a chance of jumping over it. As in, sometimes actually better to maintain your growth, at least with decent levels, actually raise money.
So it was, when you said this to me, I was like, oh, no one said that to me yet in the 6 months we've been talking about this. And then I've been talking about it almost in every business, because I find that most of us who are loss-making businesses or in loss-making businesses, growing businesses, probably won't make it to break even. I mean, hopefully you can, but probably won't make it to break even. So there's a real question mark about whether you get on the path to profitability and simply make yourself look unattractive, which is, it's gonna end you if you end up on that one. So no answers here, just really tough questions. We're gonna go to another case study, because I want to hear Vanessa's story as a turnaround and in a very different space, and then we can start digging into some more things, because I want to talk about how you make decisions. I want to talk about how you prioritize. I want to talk about a lot of other bits and pieces, as well as perhaps get into that funding and cash flow question. And your former chair has now arrived, Mandeep, so we have to say nice things about him. Hello, Tobin, nice to see you. So Vanessa, Vapiano, for those who don't know, is pizza and pasta, big big business and was a very big business.
Yeah.
You were a non-exec, then chair, and then
Exec chair or
exec
CEO,
chair, and then
basically.
CEO, right? What
It-
tell us the
it's a
story.
big business.
Tell us the story.
It has still, I think, about 200 restaurants. Very simple pizza, pasta. Heartland was in Germany and still is in Germany, actually. Split, probably a third corporate and quite a number of franchise as well. And I do feel a bit fraudulent talking about Vapiano because in my too long a career, over 30 odd years, I was only there for just over 2 years, but it was a jam-packed 2 years, really. I joined it because I, like a lot of the businesses I've gone into, I view them, if I'm a lapsed guest, and I was a lapsed guest of Yo Sushi, so that triggered an interest, and I was a lapsed guest of Vapiano because when it first opened, it's now 25 years old, you know, it's quite high tech and different and simple and successful. And they floated on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. It's a German entity.
They raised an extraordinary amount. Right?
Raised an extraordinary amount of money. And then maybe not even 2 years later, I was knocked on the door about joining as a supervisory board member. Their main office was in Cologne. So I was keen because I wanted some international experience to prove that you could do any job anywhere for my children. And I enjoyed Vapiano historically, and there looked to be a role to play. So literally in the space of 2 and a bit years, I went from supervisory board to chair to CEO.
When you were made CEO, summarise how bad things were.
Well, it was very fast track when I first joined. Sorry to backtrack a little bit before I answer that. You have these ideas of how businesses are operated or run, and generally it's always an element of positive surprise or not. But it was unusual because I think they had raised a lot of money and invested it quite quickly, and we were about to start to untangle the difficulties with that. Soon after, from August when I joined in January, we realised we would have to go into a refinancing, basically. And you're right, talking about the CEO in the right position to do that. We realised we didn't have the CEO in the right position to do that. But so we were in very difficult times. We had to restructure with a consortium of banks. There were 6 bankers across Europe who didn't agree, and we had 3 major shareholders, although it was listed, who didn't agree either. And we had a CEO who went, and if you've ever operated in Germany, you have these very interesting AGMs. So my first day was heading up an AGM in Germany, which the public come and eat their sandwiches, take their free drinks, and then heckle with the panel quite violently. So, you know, Jamie and I were talking about trying to categorise or summarise these couple of years in 3 key areas of how we got through the other side over those 2 years with COVID in the middle, which we did. I'll cut to the end so you know what's coming. We did, unfortunately, we had signed heads of terms for a refinance on the 11th of March, and then we went into COVID on the 12th in Germany, so we shut 240 sites. But we managed to sell it through insolvency. So actually, when you go back into the Vapianos now, we had very few closures. So it's still alive, it's still in great hands now, so it's a positive end to the story. But it was a bit of a baptism by fire, and I segmented these areas of focus across 3 chunks, really, when I joined in the role as CEO. And you're right, actually, alongside me, I had 2 fundamentally key partners who were German, but we had my CFO, who again, in a time like this, the stress that goes and the workload that goes onto a CFO is quite fundamental. My background actually is finance. I did 10 years in finance, so I had some understanding of that as well. But we also had to appoint, because of the bank consortium, a restructuring officer as well. So the CRO the CEO and the CFO, we literally were 24/7 together for a number of months working this through. And we had three main focuses. The first one was about communication, which was very close to my heart because we had this wonderful team of people who understood the crisis that we were upon, really. So we also were a public company, so we had a hugely interested external shareholding base and public base, and that historically we'd aired our dirty laundry too much in public. So we recruited new advisors on that and really focused on what we wanted to communicate externally. And then particularly and more to my heart was about keeping the team and the franchise partner and the joint ventures and everybody else, to a large degree the guests too, fully up to date, because it was very public news that we were in this crisis. So we did a lot of touring the site still in our spare time, talking to team members on the floor. We did video links. We did every fortnight we did a open house, come to the office and we will update you. We did a newspaper called Vapiano Parliamo, which was ridiculous, but it was a bit of fun, about the highlights of actually what was going on.
And how much are you communicating about the toughness that you were facing? Because I guess the question for me is on this one is how transparent to be.
We had to be because it was in the papers. And so the equivalent of the Sun in Germany was running the stories all the time. So if it was down to quality of Vapiano with the headline, it's going down kind of thing. So we had to communicate to the team in particular to reassure them, basically.
And before we move on to your second, we talked about transparency and communication from your experience. What's your view?
Just a snap, probably. So I think it is difficult if you're in a situation where you don't have a plan. So what they want is a plan. Ultimately, they're looking for leadership. They're looking for a plan. And so if you're not able to go in front of them, then the team, and partners actually as much are looking for, it's okay, it's going to be bad, but here's our plan. Investors are looking for a plan. So in that holding pattern of whilst you're figuring out the plan, actually that's probably, well, in my experience, some of the hardest times to communicate because you're not meaning to be vague, you're not meaning, but you need to give confidence. And the different audiences handle that differently. So investors, it's okay if you say we're working it through, this is the time frame, we'll come back. It can be this is what we need from you to help inform the plan or not. If it's the team, it's much more, this is what the stage we're at, celebrating any wins that are coming through whilst you're figuring out the plan, but being really transparent on the things that are going not to plan as well. And I think it's over communicating. Remember, the team are adults. They see whether sales are coming through or not. They feel it. And in the landscape we're in now, we're all consumers. So we're all facing similar choices. So being able to say, this is going to be difficult. What ideas have you got? Just keeping those channels of communications open are very important. But ultimately, it's a group of people that have to get together at speed.
Constant communication, definitely. Transparency is a different question. Jules, sometimes I guess we can load our teams with too much information and it can be self-defeating. What's your view?
I think I'd like to draw a dramatic distinction between larger businesses that have teams, that have CFOs, that worry about outside stakeholders. For the smaller business, it comes down to you. I assume there are leaders of small businesses in here in abundance. It comes down to you. And instead of having to worry about communication with outsiders, it's, my God, how do I talk to my partner? How do I talk to my friends? Because everything you've put into this feels like it's about to come crashing down. So there's a very different type of communication there. And I'm not saying one is easier than the other, but one is about a manager's job with a team and the other is about being at the front with follow me. So different game for the size of business.
You've pivoted our conversation beautifully onto how our founders and our CEOs in the room care for themselves. But I'm slightly nervous. I've cut Vanessa off in her prime with only one of 3 lessons learned. So I'm going to come back and we'll hopefully pick up on that point a little more, and certainly one of the breakouts we'll talk about it. Vanessa, do you want to give us a number 2?
Yeah. So the second one, which may sound a little bit ironic, was we termed it invest in the guest. So yes, we were very strapped for financially, but we were insistent that we would do what we could within our means and very efficiently and effectively start to reinvest more in the guests, because we had actually abandoned them. That was probably one of the key challenges of Vapiano. They were building beautiful new sites, sexy sites, and then the heartland and the core like-for-like businesses we'd slightly neglected. So we went on all of these 3 things ran as a tangent. So aligned to that, we were doing a rebranding. We enhanced the historical brand of Vapiano and invested in that. We were doing new menu development because it hadn't been touched for 2.5 years. So we did some new exciting food and drink menus. We invested in tech. We launched a better app. We launched service speed and service complexity was one of our biggest challenges. So we changed and trialed some new service styles.
This is a lot of improvement to the business. Yeah. At a time when cash was running out. Was there a trade-off to be taken between that work and cash?
Yeah, I mean, cash was running out. But some of these work streams had started some time ago, but had been slightly abandoned. And what we did was we did it as lean and mean as we possibly could, but we couldn't neglect it, because you can't just let it spiral into even worse scenario. No. And that was for, from shareholder point of view, from team point of view, and from guest point of view.
But I think that's such an important message, and I'm going to come back to Mandeep on this as well. I don't think it matters if we're having to do a major redundancy round, or we're working on our basic product or service. Actually, a moment of crisis, as we all found out with COVID, is an opportunity to fast forward the development of your business and make it stronger, and in your case, redesign it completely, Mandeep. Yeah, but do you agree with that?
Yeah, short answer, yes. Agreed. But it is an opportunity, right? I mean, to quote Homer Simpson, it's crisis-opportunity. So crisis and moments for opportunity as well, right? And I do think that's very true. You just you just have to be like brutal about those decisions, right? It's
brutal about
making tough calls, right? So if you're changing direction completely, right, there's you kind of have to let your legacy go, right, and not hold on to it, and even if that involves team or partners, for example, who are important to you, and that's what we actually had to let go, for example, about 2/3 of our BCs when we pivoted at the time.
And first time you'd done a mass redundancy, or had you? No,
yeah,
you've been in private equity, done it a few times. Jules, what's the playbook here? If you could take a mic, let's try and generalize this a little bit from the tough, and everybody's got a different tough experience they're facing at the moment. But what are the basic rules of the game here for you?
Well, I'll take this from a smaller business perspective, because I think the larger businesses are very well served here. So from a smaller business, the problem is resource. You can spend, let's assume you're the MD or the CEO of the business, you can spend all day answering the phone to people you can't pay. Now, that isn't much fun. I've done it an awful lot, but they still won't pay me. So the first thing is pay all your small creditors, because they make as much noise as big creditors, and it matters hugely to them. So pay all the small ones, then you can have a discussion and a negotiation
with the larger ones because the larger ones need you to stay in business. Now let's talk about the government. What a great source of finance they are. All your, we can't pay the VAT, we can't pay the PAYE, that's a horrible thing to do. And it really weighs on people because there is a fear factor there. But if you don't pay them, first of all, it'll take ages for them to write to you. And then 3 months later, there's a discussion to be had. And the discussion to be had is with somebody that doesn't hate you for having got your cash flow wrong. They're just sitting in an office. They've got people to talk to. They need to collect money. They don't want you to go bust because that defeats it. So once you get into a feeling of unease about cash, don't be afraid to stretch VAT and PAYE. The last one really is phone people. And I will use an expression that I learned from a Far East supplier when we couldn't pay the bills and we needed the goods to come. Richard's nodding knowingly. Right, so what he said was little must come. Now, what did he mean by little must come? What he really meant was within his business, if you owe me $100,000 and you send me 10, it's a problem. If you send me nothing, it's a big problem. So when you're talking to your larger creditors, little must come works well.
So we have one of the workshops is how can you use your balance sheet and your intelligence and your hustle to stretch out your working capital and how we deal with our debts, but also how we deal with our customers and who we can get prepayments from and these sorts of things and other aspects. So we'll delve into that a little bit. I want to talk about focus and back to sort of Vanessa's point, and maybe this is a how bad or very different situations, different circumstances, but many of the businesses who are trying to navigate next year without spending as much money have some choices to make to stop doing things, and I think stop doing things that won't pay back for a long time. What were there things that you dropped at Vapiano that you didn't do, or is this just are we talking a different scale here with the business?
That was actually the third point, was as if by magic.
We've forgotten.
And that was the third point of efficiency, really, and cutting out costs. So we also, there was a lot of fat on, which is an awful word and expression, I wish I hadn't used that, but there's lots of different layers of organisation structure, which just wasn't necessary generally, and definitely wasn't necessary at this environment. So we did reduce headcount, I'm afraid. We did it quickly and swiftly and removed layers. There's too many layers between the guys on the floor in the restaurants and the ops people and this great big hierarchy that had been made. So we did do cost initiatives throughout. One was headcount, but remember, part of the threesome was a CTO who's not CTO, sorry, a CRO. The CRO was fundamental in taking out costs where we could take out costs. And one thing we did actually, we had a huge supplier list and we got them all in one room and negotiated. We just did these like speed dating negotiations around the tables of every supplier, and we made a fortune from that. So we reinvested that in the guest. When you say, it's a bit indulgent to invest in service or systems or whatever, we did reinvest it, but we had fat, unfortunately, to take out.
But I think this is the point, isn't it? You've got to take out costs, but you've got to, if anything, you've got to improve your customer experience. Yeah. You've got to become even more. I mean, some of you may have listened to the podcast I did with Aaron from Bloom and Wild. I tell everybody about it because it was so brilliant to me as a lesson of being obsessed by customers. Every single answer was his obsession of the customer experience. And I think in this moment of change, where you are going to cut things and you are going to take stuff out, you've got to be even more obsessed about the customer, if that's possible. I mean, hopefully you were that obsessed to begin with. Ella, from your point of view, restructuring an opportunity as much as a painful thing to do. Any lessons as well?
Yeah, no one wants to do it. No one wants to face into it, but it can be a huge opportunity, actually. I think when executed well, there's an expression, me round Instagram, it's Tom Hanks, and he's basically with a load of other celebrities, and if you've seen it, he says they're giving their life lessons, and he says, "This too shall pass." And everyone starts nodding. He says, when you're having an amazing day and you think you're king of the world, it will pass. And when you're in a storm, it will pass. And we've been talking about it quite a lot at True. Like, there is going to be winners and losers, unfortunately, through this process, and it will pass. And so what is going to be important to your customer, whoever they are, in a year, 18 months, 2 years, getting your head into that now and trying as hard as you can to be able to conserve, if at all possible. It's not always possible, so you either have to hunker down and ride it through, or if there is a possibility to be thinking about that next step, whether that's innovation in product, a new feature that's going to be relevant, so that not all innovation or progression slows. That's the kind of holy grail. And if you're not in a position where you can carve out either resource or cash to do that, then the hunker down and just every decision every week about what is on my customer's mind. Like, I see it time and time again, and we've been working with an apparel business recently, and simple things, I'll look at the trade plan and I'll think, why is that the trade plan? And it's like, because we want to tell them this. I say, well, they don't care about that. They don't care about that. Like, lovely, you're really excited that you've done this collaboration. Why does the customer care about that? So for me, it's going right back into, if you go from growth to non-growth, quite often you can out of detail. And that, if you have a team, conscious not everyone in the room will, but you could find yourself back in to reset that customer mindset again, so the team then take over it. And I think that carving out, it will pass. And those that can conserve cash and come through it, unfortunately, for all of us in some guys, there will be some people that don't survive this. So therefore, what's going to be your differentiation, or what are you going to offer in the market when this does pass?
Giving Mandeep a warning that in a minute I'm coming to him to give us 3 things. I'm going to ask you for 3 things, or just tell us some great stories of fundraising tips when you're running out of cash and hope and life's miserable. I'm coming to you in a second. Jules, before I do though, you wanted to add something.
There's been a lot of talk about customers and customer journeys and customer experiences. Well, that's absolutely right. And who could disagree with that? Well, there is somebody, and that will be the person that thinks it's going to do bugger all for my customers if I go bust in the next week. So I urge contextualization of the plan versus can we stay alive long enough to see the benefits? Because it could be easy to just follow a plan because it's good and exciting. You've got to survive.
And that's a follow-up. Your basic rules for survival. We've had some about cash flow management, but what about the stuff you cut out, the stuff that you stopped doing? What's your view? How much have we got to focus the business in these tough times?
Just say no. Just say no to everything. And if you reflect and think, well, maybe I do need to do this, fine. Start by saying no. If you have a finance person, the answer's no. Before you ask, the answer's no. There's no money, no check. We put a certain number of people in the hat each week, and if you piss me off anymore, you won't even go in the hat. Now, in a way, if you're in a small, medium-sized business, that is what you do. And if you're talking to a potential finance person at interview, ask them if they've looked at a pile of invoices and know they can't pay them. Because if the answer to that is no, we run our business better, They're not for small, medium-sized businesses.
I'm going to leave it with people on this thought with regards to that comment. Many of you are entrepreneurs. The word no doesn't really, you're full of optimism and belief, and it's that might kill you in this moment, as well as be your saving grace, because we find it very hard to say no to things, and reducing complexity is going to be core if you want to just have the costs in your business that you need to have at this point to maintain your growth trajectory and somehow be on a path to profit and deliver all of it. Okay, so we're in the world of doing some degree of growth still, and we're still losing money, or we can't get to profit. Mandy, we just know we're going to have to raise money next year, which is what every VC says don't do. Is don't try and raise money next year, is what everybody says. We've got a workshop afterwards about how you can do it, but give us some of your experiences of how really how you hustle, because this is basically the year of the hustle, right?
So we had several moments of running out of money, having to rustle up extra money. I think the story I was telling about earlier, the pivot, I think one of the things, number one, is don't do, which was we were sent out to go raise external money on something that clearly was kind of uninvestable from external investors when we had internal ones. So first thing is don't waste your time. Be really brutally honest about whether who you can speak to, and whether there's a realistic chance of them ever giving you money, because it's far better to concentrate on a small group and really figure out how the hell you're going to get money from them. So in our case, coming on to number two, it was internal investors, and there were 2 and 3. The first is that we had massive signaling risk, essentially, so we couldn't go raise external money because we had big internal investors, but our big lead investors didn't want to give us money because they essentially they were hesitant to go first, and they had other business in the portfolio they were prioritizing. So we went to our smallest investors first. We essentially worked backwards up the cap table. We started with our angels, started with our smaller investors, got them to commit conditional on our larger investors coming through. And then when we went to our big investors, we were very much in the way of, hey, you just need to do your bit, and it's going to unlock all this cash from everyone else down the cap table. In our experience, VCs don't want to be they don't want to be seen to be doing it alone. They don't want to be caught as like the idiots throwing good money after bad. So if you make them feel that everyone else is supportive, and it's much in our case, I think it was much easier for their ICs to be able to go there and say, hey, we just need to do our bit, and it's going to unlock all this other cash, and everyone else will want to do it except for us. And look how much this investment, our existing shares could be worth. That was worked far better for us. And number 3 was talking about hustle and personal relationships. For example, Tobin, our chair, he had personal relationships with one investor, and he really had to stick his neck on the line. But I mean, use the people around you, like your board, your chair, your angels, because actually sometimes it allowed us to play a bit of good cop, bad cop, and investors do care about their reputation and what it might seem for other businesses. So I think people who are slightly external, like your chair, going, hang on, like, look, if you don't put cash in, right, and you let this business go under, look what that's going to mean for your reputation. It's not worth it. And playing those kind of cards was useful as well.
I find that the old-fashioned scenario planning helps a little bit too. If you map out the base, very, very simply, you map out, here are the 3 different places we could end up, and here is that getting to break even path you want me to be on, but take a look at what at best we look like. You've got to show you've thought through every possible scenario, I suspect, before you go certainly to the venture capital guys and say, give me your money, right?
That's a really good point, because even for our existing investors, if you just clearly begging for cash doesn't work, but going like, hang on, this is, if you put this money in, look what we can get to, right? And that whatever that new plan is, you're still selling them that dream, right? That vision of where you're going to end up. And that was, so we actually shared, hey, look how much we can do with this little bit of extra cash, right? And laid it out for them, and we prepared the plan. But I think that's a really good point, Jamie.
So if I can just add one thing to that, one of the things I've been talking to one of the portfolios about is you have to believe in it. Like the passion and the enthusiasm goes a long way still. So that is actually we're in the business of investing in businesses to grow at some point. So don't lose that kind of, it's going to be okay in that passion point. But maybe be really honest with yourself on what those milestones of success are. So if you're in front of an investor and you want £1 million, do you need the million all that day? Or actually, what is the plan for that cash? And then how can you come up with milestones so that in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, look, we are on path. I want the rest of the money. So think about it as, do you back your plan? And what are you going to be all celebrating in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months? Because then as long as you're building proof points, but also it's fine to go in as well and say, I thought this and it didn't work, but this is what I'm doing. You only get a few of those. But as long as there's the milestones, then I think we're in a condition where there is still money to be invested and people want businesses to grow. It's just be mindful of the ask, I'd say, and really think about how much you need to see you through. I think there was a time where it was like, go for as much as you can, was kind of the thinking, go for as much as you can. If you go in with that, then know what your milestones of success are so that you bring that investor along that journey with you.
This is definitely the pause moment for the entrepreneur selling the dream. It is map out the detail. Vanessa, you managed to pull your funders together. COVID got in the way. What were some of the? I mean, I think you said right at the beginning everyone was not aligned actually at all when you took the job. So yeah, apart from just constantly and engaging with them, what were some of the tricks that brought people into alignment, both the banks, the shareholders and the board?
I think, I mean, from the shareholder point of view, I mean, they had a personal investment. And as I say, the three main shareholders, although they didn't necessarily get on together, but they had been throughout the journey with Vapiano actually, taking it through the listing. But I think, you know, we had so many sessions with, as I say, this consortium of banks. I think a couple of things probably brought it together. And it sounds very soft, and maybe I mean my background is finance, so I do have that number slant on things, but this is a bit slushy. I think they'd been with Vapiano for so long and the journey so long, they really knuckled together and did the right thing actually, because we had a huge amount of employees, we had a core successful brand, we were just too much in debt at the wrong time. So I think they, you know, it was a lot of hard work, but I think they finally realised what they needed to do.
You must have had to do some convincing, though. I mean, by the very nature of the fact that you changed the menus, you updated the brand, you were doing all of this work. The business had been unloved in many ways.
This is the bizarre thing, and I think this is the
just don't want to take credit.
No, I think this is the positive side of hospitality actually, because whenever I walked into this room, which was literally a board of 40 people for every bank session we had, there was 40 because they all had 2 lawyers and they all had translators because we were international. So we had a board table of 40. I would stand at the front and they were just interested in all the operational stuff I've mentioned about the service cycle, the change of menu, the, you know, little mini refurbishments we were doing. For a bunch of bankers and their lawyers, that's what they wanted to talk about because it made sense to them. And as I say, they generally had this love for the business. It had just gone too fast spending without a really well thought through plan.
And without wanting to suggest that our investment community aren't just numbers people capable of making tough decisions. Actually, they are humans with hearts and have bought into it and have got excited by it and do want it to succeed. So an element of how are you going to communicate that? I'm aware of the time and I want to make sure I get some questions for the panel. Just a reminder, we are going to have workshops on people. We're going to have workshops on managing cash flow. We're going to have workshops on raising money. So if at all possible, any other questions? Or if you've got a very sort of good question that just I've completely missed diving into because there's been too much to tackle today. So if you could just put your hand up and I will call on you. Yes, sir. So name, please. And I don't actually know where you are today, Stephen, but anyway, tell us. Oh, well. Very good coffee, everybody. They don't have it here at True. They've got something else, but I don't know if you're still shareholder or not. I haven't followed the story. So that was Stephen Rappaport, founder of Pact and Other Things. Your question, sir. Who wants to have a crack? Mandy? And then I'm going to ask Jules, because I think you just knock heads together, don't you, Jules? But anyway.
I'm quite interested in Jules and Ella's view next. I'm afraid to sympathise, but Oz was so early, maybe, that perhaps we didn't have too much of an issue, but we did later on. But we did have people who we were able to clear up their cap table over time because, you know, frankly, they were disengaged. You know, we kind of managed to nudge them off the board. They were still shareholders, but we managed to do, when things picked up, things worked again, and we kind of solved it then by clearing by getting them bought out. So I'm not sure we solved it in a way.
So just to be clear, you had the way you solved misalignment is you got rid of the people who weren't aligned. It's a pretty simple way.
Short answer, yeah. But it was a function of the stage because it was so early and there were small shareholders, right? Such small shareholders that, it wouldn't have been worth trying to like align them, frankly. So maybe Gus or Ella have a better answer.
Who'd like? Jules, do you want to go? Or?
Sorry, Jules. No. Yeah, I did.
I don't really know the answer to this. I've spent so much of my life with misaligned shareholders, and I've got to the stage on misaligned shareholders where we did a deal that actually got them their money back, and one of them was so pissed off he wouldn't give us his name and address, so he didn't get the money. Small one. I can give you other examples. I was involved with a business called Cornwall Farmers, which was a cooperative, and there were something like 100,000 individual shareholders with an average age of 94. So the AGMs were a riot of mishearing, misspeaking. Just, if you want to be disappointed as a leader of a business, talk to that crew down in Cornwall, because they are miserable with it. In the end, we ended up with about 6 of them that still came to the meetings, and they're still pissed off. So try and not make it personal, and don't think you can solve their problems because you don't know why they invested in the particular way. There can often be financial structures that make them behave in a way that appears illogical. So you're not in business to please them. You've got to be straightforward, honest, and then it's up to them.
That's going to be the truth for most people. It's not going to be possible, almost certainly, to align everybody. You've just got to decide who needs to be aligned and get them on board, and be respectful to the others and their different points of view. Can I elaborate on it? No, I'm the man of the one-liners. You have to elaborate on things.
Jamie's touched on the reality of it. Get your big ones aligned, and the rest of them, well, sorry you're pissed off, Mrs. Jones, but this is what's happening.
I find that most people, if you show that you've listened to their point of view and explain your decision, are pretty good, generally. And if they're not, then they're the people you don't actually want to be in business with anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree on the big ones. I was on a board, and there's nothing worse than a disaligned board because it just slows you and it's exhausting. And you turn up every month and you think, oh crap, this can be rubbish. So it's like it just can kill a business and it can kill your spirit. So the big ones definitely. But coming back to that pivot point, so again, they believe in you in the first place and your plan. So take the time once you've got the big ones to explain why the pivot. It sounds really obvious, but why the pivot and the data behind it, if there is any, and then the time frame that they'll let you try as well. because most people, they don't want, there's no good going to come from a disengaged founder or entrepreneur either. So it's a two-way street. So coming back to that, this is why the pivot, this is what the data says, we're going to go for it. Let's be aligned for 6 months, a year, whatever that looks like, and here's how we know it's working. Then I guess relating to their human side of the success and that they want to back you still, I think that goes a long way as well.
Another question? Yes. And just because people online weren't here, I should have done this for you, Steve. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Hi, I'm James Dawson. I'm the founder of Humble Grape. We're a small wine bar group in London. We're kind of mid-tier and we're going into a recession next year, and our focus has always been on sustainable wines, biodynamics, organics. And we care about the quality of our product very much in our team, and we're kind of mid-tier, and everyone's telling me you've got to cut your prices and go into next year with something more accessible, but that's really not the market we want to be in. But we know people are going to have less money next year, so do we hold the line and maintain the quality of our product and hold the line and not try and reduce our portion sizes and all that weird stuff and just focus on customer care, or do we do something else?
And that doesn't just have to be about a hospitality business, but I will start with Vanessa. But there is a general point we haven't touched on in terms of how do you deal value? How do you give value next year?
I think going back to earlier conversations, I think you stream your wastage, you get rid of that wastage and you hold your ground and you stay true to what you've done. You get the right people around you, you give great service and smiles and crack on. But no, I would not change my strategy. I have a little restaurant. I am an entrepreneur as well, so I do understand. We have one restaurant, my husband and I, and no, I wouldn't. But boy, are we indexing on guest care and communication and family feel. It's a very family business, yeah, but I wouldn't compromise.
And before someone else asks a different industry, I will say that in hospitality, you can hide value and you can show value without it being obviously devaluing your business. You can do all sorts of things that actually help the customer get a better value deal without devaluing the brand, and you just got to be clever about it.
The word value isn't price. Different things. So I would encourage you to stay true, push the message, because what you can actually juxtapose is when you don't have a lot of money, spend it wisely. So you don't want that. This is what we stand for. We know you like it. So I double down on your brand messaging.
Any other industry experience? The quite clear constraint on consumer spend next year.
Yeah, give it a go. I guess what's interesting across our portfolio is it's so diverse that we're all facing into, whether it's energy drinks, fashion, homeware. I think what I would say, if you take that approach of buckle down, don't devalue the brand, adjust your growth metrics, really obvious, because we are in a recession and therefore the spending is going to go down. So you can't do one without looking at the other. So you still got a cash preserve, and then it's okay if you don't grow, or even if you go backwards, as long as your P&L will see you through that period of time. So that, like, if you're going to hold true, make sure your P&L adjust it accordingly. And then for others, honestly, we've seen apparel's a really good one at the moment. Literally, if you aren't on some form of discount right now, again, you're just not getting the sales. So if that's okay, if you adjust your expectations on the top and you can wash that all the way through. So I think you need to play into the consumer mindset, but if you choose to hold it in whatever category you are, that only works. I'm stating the obvious, but that only works if the P&L will go through that period of time with you. So if not, there could be a whole other opportunity as well and a different customer base. So you have to test things, I think, and go with where the consumer is. And by category, we're seeing it's super different. So that's the other thing. It's quite difficult to give this is the thing, because each of the categories, some are more recession proof than others.
By the way, joining the dots with the misaligned or the shareholder group, this is definitely the time to hit your numbers, by the way. So for those of us who might be the optimistic budgeters out there. This is a good year to be doing that anyway, to hit your numbers. We're going to take. I'll take one more question if you promise all to run really fast into the workshops, or we'll take the questions into the workshops. If there is, no, we'll take the questions into the workshops. Okay. Just before I hand over to Gussie to lead the way for the workshops, and because I'm tired now and I need your help, please, Gussie. I do want to just give you a heads up on the advice I got from the last 2 podcasts I did, which was Aaron, who I already mentioned from Bloom and Wild, and then Evgeny from Makers. And if any of this rings true, you might want to listen in. I told you the story already about obsessing about your customers, but those weren't in Aaron's 3 things. He said, stay on top of the numbers. I mean, self-evidently important. He talked a lot about focus, though, which we've touched on today. And he talked about continuing to be kind, and that's important for his brand, but for many of the brands in the room and for many of the leaders in the room. You can fire people and be kind. You can disappoint customers and yet still be kind to them if you take the right approach. Evgeny, oh my goodness me, if you like poetry, and even if you don't, will you listen to the podcast with Evgeny? It was wonderful. Evgeny was the founder of Makers and is now a coach for founders. Who uses poetry every now and again. So it was quite a spiritual podcast. Anyway, learn to be still. You're going to go through some real shit time. So this is where you have to dust off your meditation skills. Looking after yourself, we touched very briefly on it. We didn't spend more on it. He was very, very big on it. And then face brutal facts. We've talked about the fact that you just got to face the truth. And recognize it, and then the flip side of it is to believe in your ability to overcome it, because that's going to get you there once you've got the plan. So those are some other bits and pieces that came out from those podcasts. We're going to break into the workshops before we all get together and natter over drinks later.